Hi and welcome to your very first section in this course. In this section, we're simply going to be introducing Python and making our very first app. In this introduction to Python, we're going to be going over installing Python and using IDLE, which is a development environment that comes with Python. We're going to look at what variables, strings and integers are, and strings and integers are just types of data the computer can hold. We're going to be looking at methods and parameters, and then we're going to be going into creating our first app. The app is going to be called Our Age in Seconds. And this is going to be a simple program that takes our age in years and then gives it back to us in seconds. As you can already imagine, this is simply a multiplication. Multiply your years by a few numbers and you get it back in seconds. But it's going to be used to get us acquainted with some methods, some things that Python can do. Such methods are going to be the str method, used to convert a number to a string, and the int method, which does the opposite and converts a string to a number. The print and format methods, which are used to work with strings and print them out to the user so the user can see them, and the input method, which is used to get something back from the user, ask them a question. We're also going to be looking at some flow in the if, elif, and else keywords. And these are used to tell the program to do something or something else if a certain condition is met. The program is going to look something like this. We first ask the user to enter their age, they'll type it in, and then we'll give them back their age in seconds. Of course, there'll be options to extend this program further with the knowledge that we'll be giving you in this section. But that's pretty much it. So let's get started, and I'll see you in the next video. So in this video, we're going to be installing Python. In order to install Python, simply go to www.python.org and then you'll be met with this page. If you go into the download section, you'll see here a download for, and in my case, Mac OS X. If you're using a Windows computer, you'll see Windows. We want to download Python 3.4.3. Another option, if you don't see the correct platform here, is for you to go into Windows, Mac OS X, or other platforms. And here you'll have all the other platforms that you can download Python for. Python is available in nearly all platforms that you could think of. Once you've downloaded and installed Python like any other application, move on to the next video where we're going to be looking at IDLE. I'll see you there. Hi and welcome back. So in this video we're going to be looking at IDLE, just a quick overview as to what it can do and what it's used for. And IDLE, also known as the Python shell, is what's called an interactive development environment. So this means that whenever you write a line of Python code, it will instantly be evaluated and give you the answer. So for example, if we type 5 plus 5, it will instantly give us back 10 because it just evaluates that for you. So 5 is a number, and it's not a number that has a decimal point after it. So it's just a 5. This is known as an integer, a whole number. And Python has an integer as a type. This means that for Python, the number 5 and the number 5.0, for example, are completely different numbers. And they are in fact different types. Similarly, this is also a completely different type and a completely different thing in general. This is known as a string. And a string is simply a collection of characters and numbers and symbols that are enclosed between quotation marks. Python treats this literally, so it will not do anything. If we say 5 plus 5, it will simply give us back 5 plus 5 because it assumes that we simply want the collection of numbers and symbols that we've given it. If we do 5 plus 5, notice how some of it is in quotations and the other is as a number, the plus being outside the quotations and the 5 being a number or an integer. This gives us an error because it doesn't know what to do with the string and the number added together. However, if you do 5 plus 5, notice that spaces doesn't matter in Python. Then it gives you 55 because it simply joins them two together. So these are a couple of things that you can do in IDLE, and this was also a very quick introduction to what integers and strings are. In the very next video, we might look at some variables. So I'll see you there. Hi and welcome back. So in this video, we're going to look at variables. And variables in Python are extremely simple. A variable, if you've ever done any algebra in school, you know is simply an unknown in algebra. In Python, they have a slightly different meaning. In Python, they are in fact usually a known, and you can store a value in a variable. Just like in algebra, x could be equal to 5. Here, we can say that x is equal to 5. And notice how that doesn't do anything. But then, if we say x, it'll give us back the value 5 because it knows that the value 5 is stored with the name x. So you can think of x as a name for a value. Indeed, x contains the value 5. We can of course rewrite x or overwrite x to have a different value, for example, the string 5. And then when we print x, we type x, we get the string 5 back. Notice how, interestingly, we typed the string using double quotation marks, but Python gave us it back with single quotation marks. And in Python, it does not matter which one of the two you use. You can use either single or double quotation marks, whatever is easier for you to use. Of course, we can also do x equals 10, y equals 10, and then we can do x plus y, and that will give us 20. We can do x plus 10, that will give us 20, same thing. So we can use variables interchangeably for the values that they contain. And we can do this throughout Python. Anywhere that we encounter a value, we can use a variable instead, if that variable contains the same value. So this was a very quick introduction to variables, and now we're going to move on into looking at some methods. So I'll see you in the next video.
Hi and welcome to your first coding exercise. This exercise is fairly simple to start. It has two parts. First, create a variable called myVariable with the value 5. And then as a second part, create another variable called x with the value hello world. I hope you've tried this in the coding exercise just before, but let's go over it. The first thing to do is to create a variable called myVariable. And as we know, to create variables in Python, just type the variable name, my_variable, equals, and then the value, in this case, it has to be 5. And for the second part, the same thing, create a variable called x with the value hello world. And very important throughout these coding exercises is to make sure to follow the instruction to the letter, or in this case, to the symbol, hello, comma, space, world, exclamation mark. Very important because programming is about the details, and the code checker behind the scenes won't recognize that this is correct unless you use exactly these values. Make sure to have a capital H and so on. And then we can press check solution. And as you can see, all is correct there. We've created two variables with names, myVariable and x, and we've given them values 5 and a hello world. I'll see you in the very next video.
Hi and welcome back. In this video, we're going to be looking at printing things out to the screen. Obviously, not to a printer, just yet at least, but instead to the screen. In order to print something out to the screen, we have to use the print command. This is known as a method. So simply type print and then a pair of opening and closing brackets. In Python, and indeed in many other programming languages, these opening and closing brackets enclose something we want to give to this method. In this case, the content or the data that we want to give to the print method is whatever it is that we want to print. That kind of makes sense. So inside these opening and closing brackets, we'll go whatever we want to print. This can be numbers or it can be strings. If I print the number 5, I simply get 5 back. This is very similar to simply typing 5. However, you must remember that this is an interactive Python environment. Normally, when you are programming and you're making your own application, simply typing the value 5 will not get you the value 5 printed out. This only happens in this interactive Python shell. Normally, if you wanted something to come out to the user and be visible by them, you'd have to use the print command or method. We can also print a string. So remember to use the quotation marks at both sides, and remember that it doesn't matter if you use single or double quotation marks. But notice that there is a slight difference between printing something out and simply typing the string out in this interactive shell. Remember that normally, when you're writing a Python program, simply writing the string will not get you any data back, as I've mentioned before. Only printing will show something to the user. So indeed, when we print, we don't have single quotation marks around the string, whereas when we simply type the string, we do. This is because the Python interactive shell, this IDLE program, when we give it this, it gives us back the value of the string. So what is the string? And the string is hello world with the quotation marks. When we print the string out, what it does is it tells us something, and what it tells us is hello world, but it is not giving us the value of the string. It is simply printing the string out to the screen. So there's a minor difference there that you won't have to worry much about it. So don't worry about it for now, and it'll be okay. The other two methods that we're going to look at in this video are the str and the int method. And these are very easy to understand. Say if we have a variable x which has the value 5, then x contains 5, but of course if we want to say I am 5, remember that we could join up strings together like this, but if we say I am plus x, which we want to say I am 5, really gives us an error, because one of them is a number and the other is a string. So what we can do is treat x as a string. And we do that with this str method. The str converts a number to a string. And then inside the brackets goes whatever it is that we want to convert, so in this case, x. And now it will be able to join both strings together to give us back I am 5. However, do notice that x is still not a string. It was only a string here. X is still a number for all other lines of our program. And similarly, if you have x being equal to 50, then x contains this string 50, as you can see with the double quotation marks. But if we type int x, notice how this does not contain the quotation marks, because indeed x is being treated as a number. So x plus 10 is an error. Int x plus 10 gives us 60, because it treats x temporarily as the number 50 as opposed to the string 50. So this was a very quick intro to these three methods, and in the future we're going to be looking at the format method as well, and then some logic flow keywords as well. So I'll see you in the next video.
Hi and welcome back. This is the print, str and int methods. This coding exercise has three parts. Inside the exercise function, a function and a method are essentially the same thing. You may see me use both. And we have to print the string hello, comma, world, exclamation mark inside this exercise function. To make sure your code is inside the function, write your line of code with 4 spaces in front of it. And I'm going to go into exactly why that is in a moment. We're also going to create a variable called strnum, which is going to be the num variable down here, converted to a string. And we're also going to create a variable int grade, which is the grade variable converted to an int. Okay, let's look at the first part of this exercise. What we have here is a function or a method. The word method, by the way, is normally used for a function that is inside a class. So you may see me use both. Most people don't know the difference, and it doesn't really matter which one you use, really. But nevertheless, here we've got a function because it's not inside the class. We're going to look at what that is later on. And all we have to do is print the string hello world. A function, like here, is a name for a block of code. So all the code underneath this statement here is going to run whenever you want to execute this function. So it's just going to run whatever code is under it. We're going to look at this in more detail in a moment in the next couple of videos. So what we want to do is put some code inside this function to make sure it runs when we run the function. And the code checker is going to run the function for us. All we have to do is put the code in the function. And the way we make sure that the code is in the function is by making sure that there are spaces in front of the line of code. So here we can see that these 3 comments here have 4 spaces in front of them. The code that we want to put in the function also has to have 4 spaces. So I have some spaces in front, and I'm going to print hello world there. As soon as we want to write some code that is not in the function, we just remove the spaces, as I have done here. Num equals 27 is not in the function because it doesn't have spaces. And that brings us to the second part of this exercise. Create a variable called str_num, which is the num variable converted to a string. So what I have is a variable called num, and we're going to create another one called strnum, which is num converted to a string, and it tells us that we can use the str method. And we know what that is. So str_num can be str of num. Of course, it would be equally valid to just type the string 27 there. It means the same thing. However, I would encourage you to use the str function here. And similarly, at the end, I have created a variable called grade, and we're going to create another one called int grade, which is this one converted to an integer. So int grade is going to be int of grade. Let's check the solution. And as you can see, all of that is correct. So what we've done, we've put some code inside a function. We're going to look at how to create functions in a couple of videos. And we've also looked at the str and int functions that we've called here to create 2 other variables. So that's it for this video, and I'll see you on the next one.
Hi and welcome back. In this video we're going to be looking at the format method. But first, let's try to create the string I am 5 years old without using the 5 as part of the string, i.e. using a variable instead. The first thing we'd have to do is create an age variable which holds the value 5, or indeed any other value, and then say I am plus str age plus years old. And what this would do is get the I am string, remember the space at the end, just to create the space necessary for the age, and then would append the age, and then it would append years old. Now this would give you I am 5 years old, but it's a bit of a pain to write this. You have to close the string, then add, and then add again, and then put str, don't forget about that. So it's a bit of a hassle to have to do that. So instead what we can do is say I am, and then opening and closing curly brace, years old. And now this opening and closing curly brace is a placeholder for something else, and this something else can be the age. And what we do is we format the string to replace these with the age. And the way we do that is we type out our string and then dot format, And what this format method is going to do is it's going to replace whatever is inside the brackets for these two elements here. So what we have to give this format method is the age. And then that gives us I am 5 years old, which is exactly what we wanted. So what other uses does this format method have? What happens if I say I am 5 years and months old? Then we'd format and say age, and then we'd put a comma and say 7, for example, the number 7. And this age will go to the first set of curly braces, and the 7, which is after the comma, will go to the second set of curly braces. And if we had more sets of curly braces, then we would have more commas, and the next thing would get swapped over. Okay, so one last thing that we can do with this format method that is the coolest thing I find about this format is that we can say I am, and then instead of doing opening and closing curly brace by themselves, we can type in a name. So for example, age. Years old. Are you age years old too? So notice how these are the same and they have age inside them. This age is the name of the variable. Sorry, not the name of the variable, forget that. This is the name of the placeholder. So then we'd say format, and then we'd say age, which is the name of the placeholder, equals 5, which is our age, or indeed age, which is our age variable. And now I understand this sounds a bit strange, and I've done it on purpose so that you understand that Python is A, not intelligent, and B, works in very specific ways. The first age is the name of whatever it is we're giving the format method. This format method, if we give it this age, expects a placeholder to have age inside it, and then it will replace this value for the placeholder called age. So really this age and this age are completely different. This age is not a variable, it's just the name of the placeholder. This age is the variable that we created up here. And these are some uses of the format method. It has many more, and you can look that up in the Python reference, and it is a really cool thing, and it has a lot of different things you can do with it. In the very next video, we'll be looking at the input method, and then we'll proceed into the if, elif, and else. So I'll see you in the next video.
Hi and welcome back. We are now at the format method coding exercise, and we are going to be using the format method to create some variables while using other variables to fill in values. So let's have a look at the comments in the code. We have a variable called name that has a value Rolf in it. And using this name variable, we're going to create another variable called user_name_phrase. And this should contain the value hello, my name is. And make sure to use the format method. So, to create a new variable, user_name_phrase has to be equal to, and here is the string that we have to use. We can copy it, or I'd recommend always you type it yourself. Hello with a capital H, comma, space, my name is, and then here comes the name. Here we can just replace the curly braces by Rolf using the format method. So this string dot format name. And that would be the first one. Next, we've got another set of instructions. Using item name and item price, create another variable called item details that should contain the value item name is that and price is that. And make sure to use the format method. Okay, so let's do it. Item details is going to be item name, colon, space, comma, price, colon, space, that, dot format. And now you can guess what comes here. Item name, item price. So all we've done is we made sure the item details is in the right format, And then we've replaced the values for item name and item price as required. And finally, we've got friend name and friend age. And we're going to use the two variables to create another variable, multi-format phrase. And that should contain the value, hey, are you age years old? So make sure to use the format method and try to use named arguments. So we've looked at named arguments in the format method. Let's have a look. Multi-format phrase is going to have, hey, are you age years old? And now we're going to use the format method, and we can put the friend name first, and that's just going to replace as normal for the first set of curly braces. And then we're going to say age equals friend age. And that is going to replace for the set of curly braces that has age in it. So friend age is going to go in there. Naturally, because the code checker is only checking whether this variable has the right value, you could just delete that and delete that if you want. I wouldn't recommend it though. This is good training for how this method works. So I'd recommend you stick to that. Try to use the format method everywhere that you require string formatting. It's a really powerful thing, and it will make sure that you remember how to use it when you do need it. So that's it for this video. Let's check the solution. And there you go. We've got everything correct. We've created our three variables, and now we've looked at revised how to use the format method. So without further ado, I'll see you on the next video.
Hi and welcome back to the course. In this video, we're going to look at the input method, and this is brilliant because it lets us get a value from the user. So it lets us ask the user a question and get a value back. And the way it works is just another method. The name is input, and then it has the opening and closing bracket as all other methods do, and inside the brackets we put what we want to ask the user for. So, for example, enter your age as a string. This is what we want to ask the user, and notice how I left a space at the end, because the user is going to start typing immediately after the space, so having a space before the colon makes it a bit prettier. So we type that, and then notice how there's a blinking cursor that lets us know that we are expected to type something. And notice how then this input method gives us back a string, as denoted by the single quotation marks. So now we know that this input method will ask the user a question, let them type something, and give us back a string. This string can be put into a variable. Easy enough. User underscore age is the name of my variable. Remember, you can use underscores in variable names. Equals input, enter your age. Then I'll enter my age, and notice that nothing is returned in this case, because instead of giving it back to us, the developer, it's put it inside user age. That now contains the age that I put in. Do notice that I put in essentially a number. I didn't put quotation marks around it, but it still came back as a string. So if we wanted to use this age for something, we are going to have to convert it to a number by using the int method. Okay, so this is easy enough. I think you guys are ready to understand this in a very quick pace. So now we can move on and calculate the number of seconds that this person that is 50 years old has lived for. So what we'll do is int user age multiplied by 365, which is the number of days in a year, multiplied by 24, which is the number of hours in a day, multiplied by 60, the number of minutes, multiplied by 60 again, which is the number of seconds. And this gives us this very large number, 1,576,800,000 seconds, if you're American, or 1,576 million if you are British. At least I think that's the way it goes. Don't quote me on that. So this is how we would calculate the number of seconds. And indeed, we can copy this and make sure that we store the value inside a variable called seconds. So now seconds contains this number, and we can tell the user that they've lived for this number of seconds. How are we going to do that? Print, you have lived for seconds, format seconds. So we get this string, we format it with the variable seconds, replacing it onto there, and we print all of that. And then it tells us that we have lived for a very large number of seconds. And that could be our program. Easy enough to create. However, the user still has to, well, there is really no user. The developer still has to create the program before being able to run it. So really what we should do is do something that will allow the user to simply execute our program without having to type any code themselves. So that's what's going to be coming in the very next video. So I'll see you there.
Hi and welcome back. Let's ask users for input in this programming exercise. The first thing to do is ask the user for their name using the input method, and then we're going to print out hello name, where name has to be the user's input. We've looked at how to request input. We can just say something like name is the user's input. Enter your name. So this function here, this method is going to ask the user to enter their name, and then it's going to record the input and it's going to save it in the name variable. And then we're going to print out hello name, where the name is going to be the format function is going to be called there to replace the curly braces by the user's name. Let's check it. And there we have it. So we've got our name variable, which is the user's input, and then we're printing a greeting for them. So that's everything for this video, and I'll see you on the next one.
Hi and welcome back. So in this video, we're going to try to avoid needing the user to type any code. However, in the last video, I did mention that the user would not need to type any code at all, and I may have over-exaggerated slightly at this stage. We will be creating applications that the user can run, of course, without having to type anything. However, at this stage, we're not going to go that far, simply because it's not really necessary for the purpose of this section. However, what we are going to do is to make sure that the program can run in one go without having to interact with the development environment during the program. And what I mean with this is we won't be able, but we won't need to define variables and things like that while the program is running. So, to recap, what we're doing here is ask the user for their age and then multiplying their age by a few numbers and then giving them the age in seconds back. So, we have a line of code that is the input. Then we convert that to an integer and multiply it, and then we print that out. So these three lines of code can be executed one after another, as long as the user gives us their age. If we want to execute something sequentially, one thing after another, we can put the three lines under one name and create a method that will contain those three lines and execute them one after another. In order to do that, we have to define a new method that contains those three lines. And in order to do that, we use the def keyword. This def keyword is for defining a method. And this method is going to be called age in seconds. And we simply say def age in seconds, opening and closing bracket, and then a colon. And notice how Python, or rather the Python shell, instantly puts the next line under the method name and does not give us the three crocodile clips. So what we'll do is say user age equals input, enter your age, as we saw in the last video, then press enter, Now notice that nothing happens, but we get another line to type our method in. And then we can say age seconds equals int user age times 365 times 24 times 60 times 60. And now we've had the age in seconds. And finally what we do is simply print you have lived 4 seconds, format age seconds, and then we print that. And now the only thing we have to do is call this age in seconds method, like so. Then when we call that, the first line will start executing and it will ask us for our age as we've defined above. And then it'll just give us the number of seconds we've lived for. So it'll get our age, put it in user age, then multiply it by these numbers, store it in age seconds, and finally print it out. And this is how we can avoid, or rather simplify our program and avoid having to create variables and do things like that. So this is a way to simplify it, but of course later on in the course we'll be looking at creating full-blown applications that the user doesn't have to type anything in for sure. But until then, let's leave it as this, and I'll see you in the very next video where we're going to introduce the if, elif, and else commands. So I'll see you there.
Hi and welcome back. Let's look at creating methods and functions. This coding exercise has two parts. First, we're going to create a function called username, which returns the string Rolf. And then we're going to create another function called greeting, which takes a name as an argument and returns hello name, how are you? Let's create our function username, user_name. And in here, we're going to return Rolf. Returning and printing are fairly similar, and in the beginning, they can be confused. When you print a value, that displays the value in some sort of terminal or text console for a user to see. When you return a value, that value is not displayed in a terminal or console. It is instead given back to whoever or whatever called this function so that they can use it or put it in a variable or something like that. So let's return Rolf. And notice that if you do run this in IDLE and you return a value, you will see that value come out, but that's only because of the way IDLE works. If you do this in another text console that's not an interactive interpreter, you will not see a value coming back to you. Now let's create another function, greeting, that takes a name as an argument and returns a greeting phrase. So the greeting function is going to take a name as an argument and it's going to return the phrase hello name, how are you? So the phrase here is hello, comma, the name of the person, presumably, comma, how are you, question mark. A name here is an argument to this function. So whenever you call the greeting function, which can be something like this, it will return hello, Jose, how are you? And because this value is returned, we could possibly put it into a variable. If we were to print something out, which we can also do, the hi would not be put into the variable. Only the returned value would be put into the variable. Hi would be shown in some sort of text console or wherever it is the user is running this program. But that's it. So that's the difference between returning and printing. But in these coding exercises, we do not have to run the methods. We only have to define them. So these two are now defined. Let's check the solution. And as you can see, the solution is correct. We are correctly returning the values that the exercise suggested. And that's everything for this video. Hopefully it was useful, and I'll see you on the next one.
Hi and welcome back. So in this video, we're going to be looking at the if, elif, and else keywords. And these keywords are going to let us control the flow of the program, i.e., what does the program do when it encounters a situation where it should be able to decide between two different paths. For example, let's say we've got a chair that has a price of $100 or £100. If the chair is less than £100, we want to buy the chair, and if it is £100 or more, we want to tell the user to not buy it. So Python is quite easy to understand in the way that it does this. There is no need for any brackets or anything like that. Simply say if, notice how it goes on orange because it is a keyword, if the price is less than 100, and then notice how the Python shell, the IDLE, already expects us to type more things. Then we'll say buy the chair. And now we could continue telling the user things to do if the price is less than 100, or we can press backspace and that brings us to the beginning of the line, and here we can type else for what to do if the price is 100 or more. So if the price is not less than 100, we'll print don't buy the chair. And then if we press enter again, this will terminate the writing or the typing, and it will give us the output, which in this case is don't buy the chair, because indeed the price is not less than 100. It is exactly 100. Now let's say that if the price is exactly 100, we want to tell the user that they can buy it if they really want. If it is more than 100, we will tell them to not buy the chair, and if it is less than 100, we'll tell them to buy the chair. So once again, if price is less than 100, we'll print out buy the chair. Now press backspace and type elif. This means else if the price is equal to 100. Notice how there are two equal signs here, as that means that we're checking the price is equal to 100. If there was only one equal sign, this would be assigning the value 100 to price, and we wouldn't want to do that in this case. That wouldn't make sense. So price equals 100 checks that the price is equal to 100. Then we'll print you can buy if you really want. And finally, else print don't buy the chair. And now price equal 100, so we should see that we can buy the chair if we really want. So what I'm going to do is press enter and then enter again, and indeed it tells us that we can buy it if we really want to. So how can we apply this to our program? Well, let's, for example, extend our age program so that the user can decide whether they want to convert from years to seconds or from seconds to years. So let's define our method, age program in this case, and then get the user input. It's going to be seconds or years equals input give me seconds or years. Now this is not a particularly understandable question, but let's assume the user knows to type S if they want to give us seconds, or years if they want to give us years. Obviously if they give us years, we'll convert to seconds. If they give us seconds, we'll convert to years. And I will say if seconds or years equal S, then we will convert seconds to years. Notice that any line that starts with a hash symbol is a comment that does not get executed by Python. It's simply for us to read and us to be able to then understand what the code does. They're completely optional, you don't have to put them in there, and they don't do anything. They're simply for you to read. Okay, so now we can enter the value. So like so, enter the number of seconds you've lived for, and then that is going to go into user value. And then we can print out you've lived for years. Format the number of seconds int user value. And now we have to multiply these number of seconds, or rather divide by the appropriate number, which is divided by 60 divided by 60 divided by 24 divided by 365. I'm actually not entirely sure that is correct. 60 seconds, 60 minutes, 24 hours, 365 days. That should be fine. Okay. And forgot the other bracket. Okay. And now we press backspace and say elif seconds or years equals y. And now I would recommend pausing the video and attempting to create this part of the program by yourselves. How would you convert from years to seconds? We've done this previously, so it should be fairly simple for you to proceed with this. Once you've completed it, resume and we'll go through it. Okay, so we're going to convert from years to seconds. And now user value is going to be an input, enter the number of years you've lived for, and then we're going to print you've lived for seconds. Format int user value multiplied by 365 multiplied by 24 multiplied by 60 multiplied by 60. And this should convert the number of years that they've given us into seconds and then print that out. Okay, so let's see what happens when we call and execute this method. So do we want to give seconds or years? Let's go for years. And then number of years, go 50, and then it gives me the appropriate number. So I'm going to copy that and paste it, and I'll give them seconds. And I'm going to give them this number here. And it tells us we've lived for 50.0 years. And notice how this is an interesting number that we've got here. We've got a number with a decimal point as opposed to just 50. This is because when doing division, Python already converts everything to numbers with a decimal point so that it can be more precise when it's calculating. Nothing we should worry about for now. And we could potentially expand the program so that if it is 50.0, it would just print out 50. But that's not something we should worry about right now. So hopefully this explains how to use if, elif, and else. And remember that you can chain more elifs. So you can have if, elif, 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 else. And you can have an unlimited number of elifs inside one of these if statement blocks. And also remember that it is the indentation that matters. So the if and the elif and the else all have to be in the same level of indentation. And similarly, every line that is inside or under the if statement has to be indented more than the if statement. Every line that is under the elif has to be indented more than the elif, or else Python will get confused. Okay, so this was the entirety of this first section, and now we're going to be moving on to the next section after the next couple of videos, where I'm going to explain a small assignment that you can choose to do. So I'll see you in the next video.
Hi and welcome back to the if statements coding exercise. This is going to be the most complex coding exercise so far, and it requires us to modify an existing method. And that is the user even method here. So we have to ask the user for a number, print it's even if the user entered an even number, or it's odd if the user entered an odd number. Even numbers are 2, 4, 6, 8, and so on. Odd numbers are 1, 3, 5, 7, and so on. Remember, the user input is going to come back as a string. We're going to have to convert it to an integer. And finally, it tells us that we can use the divisible function if we want. The divisible function is defined up here. The divisible function takes two numbers as arguments, num1 and num2. So whenever we call this function, we're going to give it two numbers, and it's going to return whether the remainder of the two numbers is equal to 0. So there's a bit more of an explanation here. Divisible with 6 and 2 returns true, because 6 divided by 2 is 3, with no remainder, no value left over. However, if we call divisible with 7 and 2, it's going to return false, because 7 divided by 2 is 3, but with 1 left over, 1 remainder. 7 divided by 2 gives us the value 3, and there is 1 number there left that isn't divisible. Similarly, 14 and 4 returns false, because 14 divided by 4 is 3, with 2 remainder. So what the modulus, this operator here, this percent operator, the modulus operator does is it calculates the remainder of the division between num1 and num2. So num1 divided by num2 gives us a value with a remainder. And if that remainder is equal to 0, then this returns true. If it's not equal to 0, it returns false. Okay? So let's begin with our user even function here. We're going to ask the user for a number, enter a number. We are going to convert it to an int. And then we're going to say that it's even if the number is even, and it's odd if the number is not even. So, if divisible int number and 2, we're going to print it's even. Else, we're going to print it's odd. Now, let's explain a bit more what's happening here. We're asking the user for a number. For example, they can enter 5. We convert that to an integer and we put it inside the int number variable, which now contains the value 5. Then we say, if the result of this function is true, we're going to print it's even. This function then gets evaluated with 5 and 2. So num1 is 5, num2 is 2. We divide num1 by num2, 5 divided by 2, and that gives us 2 remainder 1. And the modulus operator is only focused on the remainder, so num1 modulus num2 is the remainder of the division operation, which is equal to 1. So 1 equal to 0 is false, because they are not equal. So this returns false. Therefore, this is false. We do not run it's even, instead we run it's odd. And that's what we print out. If instead they enter the number 4, then we call divisible with 4 and 2. 4 divided by 2 is 2 remainder 0. So the remainder here is 0 equal 0, that's true, and we print out it's even. Let's check the solution. And as you can see, it's all correct. What we've done here is we've used an existing function, divisible, to calculate whether something is true or not. In this case, whether the number is even. So hopefully this was useful, and I'll see you on the very next video.
Hi and welcome back. In this video we're going to be looking at an assignment that you may choose to do for this section. The program is going to be very similar to the age program, but you're going to be developing entirely on your own. Now, it's not going to be a particularly challenging assignment, just something so that you guys can get some more experience doing what we've just studied in this section. So to review first what we've done already, we've looked at variables, strings and integers. Remember, strings are just groups or collections of numbers, letters and symbols, and integers are just whole numbers that have no decimal place. We've looked at the str and int methods. Str converts a number to a string and int does the opposite. We've looked at the print and the format methods. The print takes in a string and prints it out to the user. The format is applied on a string and can substitute placeholders for variables. We've also looked at the input method, which asks the user a question and allows us to get a value back and assign it to a variable. And we've also looked at defining our own methods. Finally, we looked at the if, elif and else keywords that let us split the flow of the program depending on one or more conditions. So here's your challenge, your assignment. Create another program that will create a variable that holds a magic number between 0 and 10, or indeed any range that you want. Then tell the user to pick a number between 0 and 10, and if the user picks the right number, tell them they've won, and if not, tell them to run the program again. A fairly simple lottery-like program that nevertheless will use nearly all of the concepts that we've studied in this section. In addition, if you create the program as a method, or indeed multiple methods, that would be even better. So good luck, and I'll see you in the next section. Hi and welcome back. In order to continue developing Python applications and starting to make more and more complex applications, we're going to need something more than just the Python shell, the IDLE sort of built-in interpreter. We're going to need something a bit more professional and something that will let us organize our projects and develop our applications easier and smartly. So the tool for the job is very popular right now in the industry and is made by this company called JetBrains. In order to download this product, simply go to www.jetbrains.com, and then you'll be at this page or a similar page. Simply click on Products and find PyCharm, and then clicking on Get PyCharm Now or on the download button. And here we can download the Community Edition. This is plenty powerful for what we want to do. Although, of course, if you want to pay for the Professional Edition, or indeed if your company supplies this for you, you may be able to use the Professional Edition instead. The Community Edition is good enough for what we're doing and is indeed a great development environment as well. So simply download it and install it like any other application, and then we'll be ready to move on and start developing more advanced Python applications. I'll see you in the next video. Hi and welcome back. So in this video we're just going to take a look at PyCharm and how we can create a new project. Simply go to the Create New Project button, and this will bring you over to this window where you can pick the type of project that you want. Now in the PyCharm Community Edition we can only pick pure Python. If you have the Professional Edition, then you can pick a lot of different presets that will make your life slightly easier, but it's not really a big deal. And then you have to pick the location of your project and also the interpreter. Now this interpreter is quite an interesting thing about Python. Other languages, some may have something like this, but many others will not. And the main difference between all of these is that some of them have this V at the bottom of the logo of the icon, and the others do not. The difference is that these four are what's called a virtual environment, and the others are not, and then some of these are also virtual environments. So what is a virtual environment? And a virtual environment essentially is a clean Python installation. You can think of it that way. That's pretty much what it is. When you install Python, it's a clean Python install. And then you can install on top of that a bunch of libraries and add-ons for Python so that you can do a number of different things. For example, be able to parse dates and times. That would be a library that you can install on your Python install, and then all the programs that you create in this system will be able to use that library and use that code. However, if you always use one system, one installation of Python, eventually as you install more and more of these libraries, you'll have hundreds of libraries installed. And then this can clog it up, and it can make it so that sometimes you have really old versions of libraries installed, and then you need new versions, which means you have to update them, but then some programs you wrote years ago no longer work with the newer versions and things like that. So it's a bit of a hassle if you have a lot of libraries installed and a lot of projects depending on the same Python installation. So the solution to that is virtual environments. A virtual environment is essentially an installation that comes from another Python install. So for example, these four virtual environments are all Python 3.4, but they're all used in different projects, and therefore one of them can have some libraries installed while the other one does not. And that helps separate the libraries that are needed for one project that are not needed for other projects. That's really all it is. And if we are to create our first application here, simply click on the small cog and then create virtual env. And then we can decide where we want to put it. In my case, I'm going to go to my documents and then click on programming here. And then I'm going to click on full stack for the course. And I'm going to choose that. And then it says that it already exists, so we'll put it in VM. So I'm going to create a virtual environment called VM that is in this directory here. And then you have to pick the interpreter that this comes from. So in this course we're using Python 3.4, so picking that would make sense. If you're using older versions of Python, then you can pick those. And then you do not want to check this necessarily. Okay, it doesn't really matter what you call your virtual environment. Normally it's called env or vm. That's the default name. And then press OK, and then that will create it for you. It only takes a couple of seconds. And when that's created, you've essentially installed Python again, but only for use in that folder. And then your project that we're about to create will be able to use that specific Python installation, that virtual environment, which means that it won't share any library installations with other Python installs and other virtual environments. Okay, so then go back to my document, programming, full stack, and then choose here, create that, and that is my project now. So my project is in my documents, programming folder, full stack, and then a folder called src for source code of my project. And now we can start doing the Python programming that is essentially going to let us develop these more complex applications through PyCharm, now with a full-blown integrated development environment and IDE. So that's what we're going to be doing in the next video. So I'll see you there. Alright, welcome back. And in this project, we're simply going to get acquainted with PyCharm, our IDE, in creating the age app that we created in the last section really quickly. The first thing to do is create a new Python file that will hold our code. So simply right-click on your source folder, go to New Python File. And I'm simply going to call it app. You can call it whatever you want, really. And notice how PyCharm already appends the author at the top, and that's great. Okay, so our app got some input from the user. Notice how PyCharm also tells you what you should be writing inside the brackets. In this case, it's a prompt variable. That is what you are giving the input function. So you're giving the input function a prompt, which is what you're going to ask the user. Enter your age, and we have to put this into a variable. And then we are going to calculate the seconds, rather age seconds. It's going to be int user age times 365 times 24 times 60 times 60. And now we're going to print out to the user what their age in seconds is. So print your age in seconds is format age seconds. Notice that with autocomplete, things suddenly become a lot easier and a lot faster. Okay, so now we can right-click on app.py and go to run. And here at the bottom we get a command prompt which asks us for our age and then gives us back the answer. Fantastic. Of course, we could put this in a method, so def age program, for example, and then simply tab those in, and notice how that get colored in as orange. And then at the bottom, all we have to do is call the age program, and then when we run this, we'll get the exact same thing happen. Essentially, this is not running initially until we call this line there, until we execute that line there. Do notice, however, that if we put this at the top, then it's an error because it has not been defined yet when we are up here. So it has to come after, or else it doesn't know where to look. Okay, so this is how we would create the age program here in PyCharm, and now it's becoming substantially easier to run the program. We simply have to press play at the top right of the screen, or command right click and press run, or press run down here at the left. So it's becoming easier, and no doubt in a couple of videos time I'll also show you how to run this without the use of the integrated development environment. But this is how you would do it, and now we're just going to be creating another project for our what price is this chair app that we're going to be creating in this section. So I'll see you in the next video. Hi and welcome back. Just a small aside before we continue. There is something I don't particularly like about most IDEs, and certainly not about PyCharm, and that is the font and the overall theme is not particularly appealing to me. So in order to change that, just go to the preferences, and then we can go to colors and font here. First thing I'm going to do actually is open up appearance, and then go over to appearance, and here you can change the theme. So you can choose a dark theme where everything is obviously not black but very dark browns and dark colors, and that's a bit easier on the eyes, and I actually quite like the dark theme. For recording it's not very good, so I'm going to stick with the white theme for the videos, but do know that I do use a dark theme at work, so you can opt for that. Try that out if you want. However, no theme is going to make the default font look good, because that default font looks pretty terrible, and certainly it's not very easy to read, and for you guys when you're looking at the videos, that font is way too small for us to do anything with it. So the first thing we want to do is change that font, and certainly I want to change that font. But you cannot modify any of the default schemes, so you need to save the default scheme as, and I'm going to save it as my name, and then you can change the fonts. So this is not very clear when you're doing things here, but you can do that. And I'm going to change to console as, which is a font I very much like, size 15 and line spacing 1.1. Then when you apply that, you can see that that's slightly more readable now. And then I'm also going to change a couple more things. So if you go into general and you go into weak warning, you see that's the very slight squiggly line under it that notified us of the PEP 8 issues in the last video, but we couldn't really see it. So I'm going to change the effect of the underwaved into being a darker grey, and that way we might be able to tell a bit more easily. Do notice that when we get a PEP 8 warning, the full line is going to be having a squiggly line under it, so it's going to be a bit easier to tell even though it's grey. Okay, so then go into language defaults, and what I'm going to change here is a function declaration. No, I think that's in the Python one. I'm just looking through. You can change any color of anything you want, so if there's something you don't particularly like, then you can change the color of it. But actually I don't think there's anything I want to change there, but there is something I want to change in the Python one. So the function definition, notice how our functions are black just like any other text, and it's not very easy to see that these are functions. Okay, I'm lying there. It's reasonably easy to see that, but I want it to be easier still. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the functions to a bright orange and make them bold so they're a bit better. Like that, and that's slightly easier on the eyes, I think. And I might make it a wee bit darker, just so it's a bit easier on the eyes. Okay, maybe not so dark. Okay, there we go. And then anything else you want to change, you can do. But I think for now, that's gonna be that. I may make the bold self, and we haven't come across this just yet, but we will very soon. And I am not going to change the keyword, I don't think. You can go into language defaults and change the keywords. But I think that's fine. I think that keyword is reasonably viewable. So we're going to leave it as that. Okay, so now not much has changed, but the font has changed and it's a lot more readable, at least for me. You can choose a different font if you want. And we've changed the color of the functions, so now it's a bit easier to see what is a function or what is not. And now that I'm doing that as well, I'm going to go back into Python, select the class definition, and we're going to change that into something a bit better, something like a bright pink. It's not very bright, but that'll do. We haven't come across classes yet, but we will, and we want to also be able to differentiate them from other things. And classes are a lot larger than functions, so we want something even easier to differentiate. So that was just a small aside for you guys to change a bit how these things go, the colors and the fonts to make them more personalized for yourselves. And I certainly cannot program with the font that was there before, but with this one it's slightly better. Okay, so don't worry about that too much if you're not too worried about that. If you are worried about that, then do. But I will see you in the next video. Hi and welcome back. So in this video we're just going to be creating the new project for our app and talking a bit about what is JSON. So the first thing to do is go ahead and create another project here under the full stack folder, and I'm going to call it price of chair, and I'm going to stick to using the same virtual environment simply because we didn't really use it in the last video in creating the last project. So I'm going to reuse it for now because the other project really isn't much of a project, so we can reuse it for this one and create another one when we do need it afterwards. So then normally when you'd create a project you would have the name of the project here at the topmost folder, and then you would create a Python package and call it src for source code. So your project would not be called src originally. That was only for sake of example and speed that we did that in the previous project we created. But in here we're going to create the source folder, and then notice how it creates an init.py file immediately inside it. That is Python's way of knowing that this src folder will contain Python files. It's nothing scary. Okay, so now we've got our project, which is also using the virtual environments that we used before. I'm going to create another file in here, and I'm going to call this file data.json. And notice how the wee icon here at the side of the file has JSON written on it. This is because JSON is a type of data. More specifically, it's a type of data that has two large data structures available to it and a bunch of data types as well. So what do I mean with this? All JSON files are structured starting with an opening and closing brace. And this is essentially like a table in a database, or rather like a row even. The first thing you have is a name, for example, students. And then this student has a value associated with it. So you can think of students as the key, or the name of the row in the table, the name of the column rather. So students would be the key, and then it would have a value associated with it. The most logical value to be associated with a student element is a collection of students, a list of students really. And indeed JSON has something like that. So you can create lists in JSON by using square brackets, unlike the curly braces used originally. And then inside the square brackets we can put the data that we want to store. For example, we've got 3 students in our students list. Okay, so that's fair enough. That kind of makes sense, yeah. But it seems a bit limited that we can only store a list of students and give that name. It probably does mean that we can look for the students element and then get a list of them, which from a programming sense is interesting, but we can do more. We can in fact use curly braces here and then say things like name, Jose, Mark, 100, ID, something like that. And then we can do the same for the other students as well. Notice how there's commas here and here, but not at the very end. So we could have something like that. And indeed, we could have another list inside a student and then another dictionary inside it, and so on and so on. So by now you've probably gathered that these things in curly braces are called dictionaries or objects, and that these things in square brackets are called lists. So a dictionary is simply a key value pair set. So we can have one key and one value, or we can have more keys and more values. But one key can only have one value associated with it. So we could not have name here twice. That would be wrong. So we can't really do that. But this is the power of JSON. It is used to structure and send information in a way that is easily readable and easily followed, both by humans and by the computer as well. It's really very easy to interact with. And also, as well as JSON, we've got something called XML. So I'm going to create something called a file called data.xml, and XML is similar in a sense that we can have also enclosing the students. We can have these two tags, this opening tag and this closing tag with the backward slash or forward slash, and then we can have something like name, or rather Jose, and then the mark 100, and things like that. So I'm not really a see, this would be a big error. This would be an interesting problem here, where the name of the student is Mark, and then he's got a mark associated with it. So XML also has some problems, just like any other type of data. And I will not be covering XML. I have never used XML before. I will not be covering it at all. This is just to give you a sense of what it is and how you write it, so you can kind of recognize it when you do see it. And XML, just like HTML, works by having these tags enclosing the content that the tag refers to. So the students here would have these two tags inside it, and each one of them would have something in them as well. However, as I said, we're not going to be looking at XML at all throughout the course. It's not really that used nowadays, especially not with Python. So we're going to be focusing on JSON, which is very versatile, very lightweight way of doing things. So this was JSON and a quick overview of what XML looks like, but really nothing in depth. Probably something that's completely wrong as well by XML standards, but just to let you know what it looks like. And now what we're going to be looking at in the very next few videos is how to interact with the web, how to make web requests, and how to parse websites, and how to get data out of them. So I'm excited about them, so I'll see you in the very next video. Hi and welcome back. So in this video we're going to be looking at how we can make a GET request, and this GET request is used to access a web page and to get the web page back and be able to load it and look at the web page. So the first thing to do is to create the file, the Python file that is going to run our application. So I'm just going to go into new Python file and create my app.py file. Remember, you can call this whatever you want. I am simply choosing to call it app. That is a fairly standard name for the main sort of file in Python. Now, if we want to make a GET request, if we want to be able to request the page from the server that it is on, if we want to request a page from wherever it is that it's stored on the internet, we are going to need a library called requests. And this requests library makes makes it extremely easy for us to make these GET requests. So there are two ways to install the library. The first way is quite simple. Simply go to your preferences and then click on Project Interpreter under your project. Press the plus sign. Well, first of all, select the appropriate virtual environment if it is not already selected. In my case, it is. Then press the plus sign and find the requests library that you want to install. And then it's here, version 2.7.0. And then finally just press install. So that is one option that we can do. But the other option is to put this in a file that Python already knows should contain the libraries that we want to install. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my project and press new file and type requirements.txt. This is the standard name for this specific file. And in this requirements.txt file, we should write all of the libraries, all of the packages, all of the code external to our application that we want to use. So simply requests equal 2.7.0. This is the name of the library and this is the version. And equal simply says, I want this version of this library. In fact, I want exactly this version of this library. Okay, and then when we go back to our Python file, PyCharm will already tell us that this package is not installed and that we should install it if we want to use it. So we can simply press on install. And after a wee moment, the package gets installed. And now we can go into our app.py and say import requests. And sometimes PyCharm does take a while to be able to do this. It is sometimes quite slow. So I'm simply going to run that and then it works. Okay, so after a couple of seconds, that now gets recognized again. You may have to run the app before it gets recognized. This is a small bug in PyCharm, but I wouldn't worry too much about it. And now we can do our request. So I'm going to create a variable called request that is going to hold this request that I'm doing. So request equal requests dot get and then http www.google.com. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to perform this request. We're going to get this page, and then we're going to put the page as well as a number of other pieces of information inside this request variable. Such pieces of information may be things like, has the page loaded correctly? There's quite a lot of information that comes when doing a GET request and that gets put in the request variable, but the thing we're interested in the most is request.content. And this content is simply the full code of the page that we requested. So this is going to return the HTML code of google.com. Okay, so let's press run and see what happens. And indeed here you can see that we get a long line of code, which is google.com's code. Okay, so this is how you can make a GET request. And in the next few videos we're going to be exploring this a bit more and essentially starting to parse the data from some of these pages. So hopefully you find that as exciting as I do, and I'll see you in the next video.
Hi and welcome back. So in this video we're going to be looking at how we can get the price of this chair. So let's imagine that we want to buy this chair and we want our application to be able to tell us whether we should buy it or not, depending on its price. The first thing we have to do, obviously, is to be able to make our application understand this page and know that this chair is £115. So notice here I'm in a UK retailer website, but you can use any website you want. Okay, so we've got the price here, and we need to make our application know that this number that is in this position is the price of the item. Notice that in this website, if you go to another item, the price is in the same position. So all of its pages are structured in the same way, and the only thing we have to do is tell the application how to find this price. Where is this price and how we can get it? So I'm using Safari, which is the built-in browser on Mac, but you can use any browser you want, and in all of them the steps will be very similar. So I know for a fact that Firefox and Google Chrome and Safari all use the same sort of steps. I've not used Internet Explorer for a long time, so I'm not entirely sure how that would go. For web development, in general, I would recommend using Google Chrome, although Safari has recently been updated and it's not bad either. So I'm going to right-click on 115 and go to Inspect Element. And what this brings up is a lot of code, so I'm bringing it up here. And notice how there's a specific code that is highlighted. So if I scroll down and I can see the price, and then hover over this, you can see that the price gets highlighted. What this tells me, this is the element that contains the price. So focusing on this element now, we can see that this looks like XML, and it's in fact HTML, which has the same sort of structure. We've got a tag name, which is span, and then we've got key value pairs, which are the attributes. So in this case, this tag has two attributes: item prop, which is and contains the value price, and class, which contains the value now-price. In addition, we can see that inside the tag, we've got the #115.00. And notice how there's spaces at the sides of it as well. So this is the HTML code of the page that we are going to get when we make a GET request to this page. So in the previous video, we made a GET request to google.com and we got some content back. When we make a request to this page, we're going to get all of this content back. So then we need to be able to understand this content and get the £115 from it. So it's not going to be very difficult, and we're going to do that in the next video, in fact. But first, let's make sure that we've got all the information we need for the next video to get the item price out. So what I'm going to do is copy the URL of the element and paste it in here. And I'm also going to copy all of this. You can right click and edit as HTML and then copy it. Notice how it has line breaks, and we'll get to that later on. And paste it here, like so. And I'm actually going to remove this and just put it in here in our request, like so. So now we're ready to continue into the next video and get the price of the chair out. Okay, I'll see you there.
Hi and welcome back. So in this video we're going to look at how we can find the price in the code of this page that we are going to be requesting. So now we're not looking any longer at the browser, but instead we're simply going to get the HTML code of this page and then search through it until we find the price. The great thing about that is that then we could do the same with any other item on this page, which means we could start potentially building some sort of application that would let us find prices of items and possibly even alert us when they go down in price, which would be quite interesting. We're not going to be building the full-blown application at this stage, but we will get back to that later on in the course. In order to be able to search through this HTML code and find the data that we're looking for, we're going to be using another library. This library is called Beautiful Soup, and it's actually a very, very popular library for doing exactly this. So if we go to our requirements.txt and we type the name of the library and the version, which we can find by going into the preferences, project interpreter, press plus, type Beautiful Soup 4, Beautiful Soup 4, and the version is 4.4.0. So that's your library name, that's the version, so we can close that, type Beautiful Soup 4 equals 4.4.0, and then go back to your app, install the requirement as you know, and then it gets installed, and we can import it from BS4 import Beautiful Soup. And once again, PyCharm is doing its thing where it doesn't run it, and there we go. So as I said, this is a small bug with PyCharm. Sometimes it takes a wee while, or sometimes you need to run the app or press install or play around with it until it works. But this is what you want to be doing here. And notice that we're no longer using the library name or the package name in here, or in fact here either. So what's this? Basically, this Beautiful Soup 4 package contains a folder or a file called bs4, and this bs4 file is the one that contains this class or this thing that we want to import. So this is why we're doing it this way. But I would not worry too much about that. Simply know that from the bs4 file we want to import this thing, and this is what we're going to be using. So now we've got this request, we can get the content of the page by doing request.content. So I'm going to create a variable with the content of the HTML code of this page. Then we're going to create a soup variable, and this soup variable is going to contain a way of searching through this data using Beautiful Soup. So we're going to do Beautiful Soup content, and we also have to tell it html.parser. And what this does is it says, okay, we're going to be using Beautiful Soup with this content that we've got, and we're telling it this is a HTML content, so we want to use the HTML parser that's built into Beautiful Soup to search through this data. Then we'll find the element that we're looking for, which is this one, and we can do that by saying soup.find, and then the name we're looking for is the span tag, and then it has a bunch of attributes that we are going to use. Notice how the IntelliSense, this is what this is called, already tells us what we should be writing. So there's a name, there's some attributes, ATTRS, whether we want to search recursively or not, this is true by default, and some text and some more optional arguments. I wouldn't worry too much about the text or the optional arguments. The recursive one is more interesting because that means it will not only stay on the topmost level of the HTML, on the topmost tag, but instead it will drill down and go to all the tags and all the children tags. Not too interesting for you now, maybe, but nevertheless I would not modify it and leave it as the default value, which is true. And then here we go with the attributes, and this is a dictionary like the JSON dictionary that we've seen before. So item prop is price, and comma class is now price. Okay, so now when we execute this, we should be finding this element here. And finally we can print the element.text, and this will be this text content here. I'm going to delete that. So let's run it and see what happens. Well, we've got £115, but it is on a bit of a strange location. Notice how there is a bunch of text, a bunch of white space before the numbers, and also some white space after the numbers. So we can remove this leading and trailing white space with the strip method. So this element.text is a string, and all strings have this strip method that you can call on them. This is what the dot means. That will remove all leading and trailing white space. So let's call that again. And now indeed we get the £115 here. However, this £115 is not a number. This is indeed a string, because it has this pound symbol in front of it. So what can we do to remove the pound symbol and to indeed convert this into a number? Well, this is what we're going to be looking at in the very next video, how to remove the pound symbol and convert the remaining numbers into an actual number that Python can understand and add and subtract and things like that. So I'll see you in the next video. Hi and welcome back. So in this video we're going to be looking at converting that £115.00 string into a number that we can compare and see if it's a low price or a high price. The first thing to do, however, is to make sure that instead of printing the text contents, that we are assigning them to a variable. So I'm going to create a variable called string price that is going to be the essentially £115.00. This is what this string price contains. And now we want to remove the pound sign. So we want to essentially get that without the pound sign. And we can do something that's called slicing. And slicing is used to get essentially a slice of a string. So what I'm going to create here is price without symbol. And this variable is going to be the string price with this opening square bracket colon closing square bracket at the end. And what this would do is it would give this variable exactly the same contents as this variable up here. So right now this would also be 115.00, which obviously is not what we want. So what does this mean? What is this doing? And why not just leave it as that, right? Well, what this is doing is it's copying. It's getting everything from the start of this string to the end of this string, and it's putting everything inside this other string. Why not just do this? And the answer to that is, if we just do that, what we're doing is saying this string now is exactly equal to this one, which means that Python does some optimization in terms of memory and things like that. Nothing that we're going to get into. So if you want to copy a string and have an exactly new string, then I would recommend that you would stick to this just for the time being, and we will get into exactly what that means in a later section. But we won't be doing this in this section. We are using this for a reason, which is that we want to get all of the string except for the very first item. Remember that counting starts at index 0 in programming, so therefore this is in fact going from 0 to the end, which means it's getting index 0, index 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So what we want to do is, instead of start at 0, we want to start at 1. And then we'll start at this index here and go to the very end. And that's what we'll do indeed. So now if we print the price without symbol and we run this app, we will get in fact only 115.00. However, this is still not a number. This is still a string, so we have to convert it into a number. If we do int, then we will get an error because this has 0.00 at the end. So what we want to do instead of int is float. And a float is simply another type of data that is a number with a floating point element to it. So this is a floating point number, which is why it's called a float. And now when we do that and we run this again, we will get 115.0. The second 0 gets dropped because it doesn't really add any more accuracy to the number. And now we can compare this and see if it is greater than 500 or less than, or whatever it is that our budget is. So for example, say if we can spend £200, we can print whether the price without the symbol converted into a float is less than £200 or not. So we press run again. We'll get the word true coming out, which is excellent. Before continuing, let's create another variable that will be the price, now as a float, and then we can make some sort of if statement. If the price is less than a certain number, which is your budget, print that you should buy the chair. If it is not, say that you shouldn't buy it. I'll let you do that, so pause the video and attempt to do this by yourselves. Once you have, press resume and we'll go through it ourselves. Okay, so hopefully you've managed. If price is less than 200, we'll print buy the chair. And if it is not, print do not buy, it's too expensive. Okay, so that's great. If we run this, it should tell us to buy the chair. And indeed it does. We can print something else as well. The current price is format price. Like that. And we can press play. And it tells us the current price is 115.0. Now, instead of using the price float, we can just use string price from above, which will give us indeed the formatted price, which may be better for this purpose. Okay, so this is how you would do this if-else statement here, and this is how you would parse the HTML content of a page to find something that you're interested in, and also how you would do requests. So this is our simple app to get the price of the chair, and in the very next section things are going to start to get interesting as we dive into object-oriented programming and doing things like that with Python. That is going to greatly increase the sort of complexity we can put into our applications, and therefore how amazing our applications are going to be. So I'll be seeing you in the next video. Hi and welcome back to the course. As I said before, in this section we're going to be creating a microblog. And in order to store the microblog posts, we're going to need a database. Another option would be to use a file and just save our posts to a file, but that's not something that you will encounter very often when you're working as a software engineer. So we're going to stick with a database, which is slightly more complicated. It will be a bit more work, but it will be well worth it when you do get it set up. So we're going to be using MongoDB. And in the next couple of videos, I'm going to be going over why we're using MongoDB and sort of how to use it and things like that. It's really quite simple, in fact. I was very surprised when I started learning about MongoDB how easy it was to do pretty much anything with it. And in fact, installing MongoDB, which is what we're going to be doing in this video, is actually not that difficult either, although it does incur some work. Now, if you go to this link here, which should be linked under the video, in the instructions under the video, you will find that you can install MongoDB in all the different systems that you would expect. So I'm using Mac OS X, so MongoDB already tells me that I can download the Mac OS X version, and that's fine. You can also install it for Linux. If you're using a Linux distribution, simply select your distro here. I'm sure you don't need any help with that. Most people will likely be using Ubuntu, so choose the appropriate Ubuntu version or whatever else you're using, of course. And also you can install it for Windows, and I'm sure that a lot of you are using Windows, and unfortunately Windows is the most complex of the installations, but that doesn't mean it's too difficult. So if we go to the installation instructions, which should be opening here momentarily, as my internet fails in the best moment. There we go. I meant to have good internet, but it hasn't been working too well. Okay, so to install MongoDB on Windows, there are a couple things you have to know, which are here at the top. Which, starting with version 2.2, the current version of MongoDB as of this video is 3.0. So MongoDB does not support Windows XP. So unfortunately, if you're using Windows XP, I can't really help you with that. You will not be able to run MongoDB on the latest version. You'll have to use 2.1, which is quite old. So I cannot recommend doing that. So if you're using Windows XP, what I do recommend is that you install Ubuntu in either your machine by dual booting or by using VirtualBox. If you use VirtualBox, you can download Ubuntu and install VirtualBox inside install Ubuntu inside your Windows environment, so you won't have to restart in order to run Ubuntu, and you can always delete Ubuntu later on when you're finished with the course. Sadly, I'm not going to be getting into how to do that here, but it's really easy. Simply look for how to install Ubuntu with VirtualBox, and it's really very easy. I've done it many times myself. And also, if you're running any edition of Windows Server 2008 or Windows 7, which I'm guessing a lot of people are, you'll need to install a hotfix, which shouldn't be a big problem. Also, do remember that on Windows, MongoDB requires Windows Vista or later, of course, and down here it says MongoDB for Windows 64-bit only runs on Windows 7 64-bit and newer versions, and of course Windows Server, but I don't think anybody's using that. So you'll need Windows 7 64-bit. If you're using 32-bit versions or Windows Vista, you're going to need MongoDB for Windows 32 bits, which has an important limitation in my opinion, which is that you can only have databases up to 2 GB in size. I'll use this time as well to recommend that you upgrade to a 64-bit version of your operating system if you are using a 32-bit version. However, you still have MongoDB for Windows 64-bit legacy, which will run on Windows Vista 64-bit, but does not include recent performance enhancements, and that's not a big deal for us. We're not going to be squeezing performance out of MongoDB. So, if you're using a 32-bit computer operating system, I'd suggest you upgrade to 64-bit unless your hardware cannot support it, which hopefully that's not the case. If you're using 64-bit Windows Vista, install MongoDB for Windows 64-bit Legacy, and if you're using Windows 7 64-bit or newer, then install the normal default version. And if you're not sure which version you're using, you can just use that command there. And after that, it's really not that difficult. Simply go back to the downloads page, download the appropriate version, that now you know which one it is, and then follow the instructions here, which are extremely thorough, and they are not very difficult at all. After you've installed MongoDB, you'll have a few files, one of which is MongoD, MongoD with a D at the end, that you can run, and that will start the MongoDB server in your laptop, or computer rather. If you do have any problems, let me know. It should be fairly simple to get it started, and this guide here is very, very good to get started with it. So, of course, do read through it and try to get that installed. In order to install it in Mac, I recommend we go to the Homebrew page, which is also linked below. And if you install Homebrew, Homebrew is a package manager, which means that once you install Homebrew, you can use Homebrew to install other things very easily. And in order to install Homebrew, you just need to copy that into your terminal. In order to open the terminal, simply open up Spotlight and type term, and then you'll find the terminal there. And then simply copy that and paste it into the terminal. That will install Homebrew. And after you've done that, you can go to the downloads page again, Mac OS X, installation instructions, and then it'll tell you that you can install MongoDB with Homebrew, and it's really very easy to install with Homebrew. Simply type brew update in your terminal, and then brew install MongoDB. And that's all you've got to do to install it in the Mac. Really, it's that simple. So the Mac, a bit easier. If you're in Linux, you can use the apt package manager or yum to install it very easily as well. I'm sure you know how to do that. Simply do yum install MongoDB or apt-get install MongoDB, and in both cases it should work. Okay, so that's how you install MongoDB. Sorry for the lengthy video. We have to go through different operating systems, and I apologize again if you're in Windows for the extra difficulty in doing that, but I promise it will not take very long to get it installed, and once you have it installed, you won't have to touch it ever again. You'll just have to double click an icon and run MongoDB, and that's all you've got to do. So once you've got MongoDB installed, proceed on to the next video where we're going to be just quickly going over how to use MongoDB. So I'll see you there. Hi and welcome back. In this video we're going to be looking at exactly why we're using MongoDB, and The main reason really is because it's really easy to use. It's really easy to get started with MongoDB. Once you've downloaded and installed it, the only thing you have to do if you are in Linux or Mac is run the MongoD command in your terminal. If you're in Windows, run mongod.exe from the installation folder. Once you do that, you've essentially started a MongoDB server ready to accept connections and ready to start putting data into a database. Do notice that the default directory where MongoDB is going to store data is here, this db path value. So your data is going to go into /data/db. If you want to change it, you can do that, and we may go over how to do that later on. So once you've got this server running, simply go to another terminal and type Mongo, and then this starts a connection to the MongoDB, the MongoD that you've started here. And you can see here that you've got one connection now open, and the connection has been accepted from 127.0.0.1. 127.0.0.1 is always your local machine. So you will be seeing the same number, although possibly a different number at the end, that doesn't matter. You'll be seeing the same number in your computer. Okay, so what sort of things can you do with MongoDB? And the answer is, you can do what you would expect with any database, really. You can create collections, you can create databases, and you can insert data, remove data, find data, things like that. MongoDB works with databases as being the biggest structure, and each database contains one or more collections, in fact 0 or more collections. And then each of those collections contains 0 or more documents. And it's really that simple. So the first thing we'd want to do is to see what databases we've got in this MongoD server. And we do that with the command show DBs. And then here we've got a few of them that I have created already, and some of them that have been created by MongoDB. Local and admin are created by MongoDB, and I've created the rest. If you want to use a database, simply do use and then the database name, so test or TeamCity or whatever else. If you type here some database that doesn't exist, MongoDB will still use it, and when you insert data, it will create it for you. So you don't have to specify that you want to create a new database or anything like that. And then once you're inside a database, you can show collections, and this will show you what collections are in the database. In this case, none. We can insert data into a specific collection by doing db, which points to the current database, full stack, dot, then the collection that we want to insert data into. Think of this as a table in normal databases, normal relational databases. So for example, students.insert. And this is going to go to the full stack databases and then insert some data into the students collection. And the data we want to insert goes inside the brackets of the insert method. And MongoDB works with this JSON data type that we've covered previously. So inside MongoDB, we can put JSON documents. So for example, name, Jose, Mark equals 99. And then it will tell you that it has inserted one row. In order to find data, simply go to db.students, the same collection as before, .find. If we give it an empty dictionary here, then it will find everything in the database, and this is the one I've just added in. Notice that this ID field is created automatically and that you don't have to worry about it. However, in the future, we might get around to changing it, so it's not created automatically, or indeed, so it is created automatically with different values. Something that I really like about MongoDB that can also be a problem is that we can insert data that is not in the same, that does not follow the same structure as other data already in the collection. For example, say something like that. So we could insert this object into the database. Item is chair, price 999, age 25, and MongoDB wouldn't care. The two elements are different. They contain different number of fields. The fields are different. The data is different. But MongoDB doesn't care. To MongoDB, all that matters is that we're inserting JSON documents, and that's fine. And then indeed, when we go to find, both of the items will be returned. Another thing we can do is remove elements. So db.students.remove, and then we can remove one of the elements. So I'm going to remove the chair element. And now what we put here is enough data to recognize one element. So indeed, item is chair is only one of the elements. If I remove everything, then that would delete all of the elements in the database. If I say price 999, that will also remove the chair because it's the only element that has that property. And there we have the number removed is 1. And then if we go to find again, we see that there's only one element now. If we go back to show DBs, we can see that the full stack database is now being created and it exists. And if we go to show collections, we can see that the students collection that we've been using also exists in this database. And a system.indexes collection has been created as well. And we'll go over what indexes are later on in the course. For now, this was simply a quick introduction to MongoDB and why we're using it. And we're going to drill down into more detail and more powerful operations as we go along the course. So I'll see you in the next video. Hi and welcome back to the program. In this video, we're going to be using MongoDB with Python here through PyCharm. So I've created a new project called Terminal Blog, and this is just a normal new project like we created in the last section. You can create a new virtual environment for it so that you receive a new clean install of Python. And once you do that, you are essentially ready to start a new project with a new clean install, nothing installed on it, so that you can only put there whatever you need for your new project. So I've created a new virtual environment for this project, and then we're going to move on and get started with MongoDB through Python. So first things first, let's create our app.py file. And this file is going to essentially act as the starting point of our program. And for now, in this video, we're just going to be writing some code here to test whether we can access MongoDB through Python and how we can do that. So the first thing we have to do is import and use a library called PyMongo for Python Mongo. And in order to be able to use this library, we of course have to install it first. So if you create a new file called requirements.txt, as we know, and in it put pymongo == 3.0.3, which is the latest version, you can always check that by going to the preferences, clicking the add symbol, and type pymongo, and 3.0.3 is the latest version. So I've got good memory. Excellent. pymongo 3.0.3, then go back to your app, and then it tells you to install it. So we do that, and now we're ready to continue developing. So import pymongo, and now we are ready to begin. So the first thing you have to make sure of is that you have a MongoDB server running. So I've just opened a console here, and I'm going to type MongoD, and then this starts my MongoDB server running on port 27017. And the address for this MongoDB server is the local host, the current machine that is running, which is always 127.0.0.1. So the address of the MongoDB instance, the URI, is MongoDB : / the server : the port. So 127.0.0.1 is the server name, the address, and 27017 is the port number, i.e. exactly where on this server we're connecting to. And then we can also give it some more data through this URI if we wanted to, but that's a bit more advanced, so we're not going to do that just in this video. If you're really interested, you can have a look at the documentation online, but it's not necessary to do anything else with this URI. And then we're going to initialize the MongoDB client. So a client has access to all the different databases in your MongoDB instance. So right now, we only have one database. So if I open another tab here and type Mongo, and then I type show DBs, we've got all our databases, and we're going to be using the full stack database here. All the others are my own, so we will not be using them just yet. So the full stack database is the one we're going to be using. First of all, we create a client, which is pymongo.mongoclient, and here we give it the address of the database, so the URI in this case. Then we type the database is going to be client, and then inside square brackets and inside quotation marks, we type the name of the database that we're accessing. So in this case, full stack. And now, the collection that we want to put things into, the posts collection, if I remember correctly, use full stack, show collections. Sorry, the students collection equals database students. And now we would be able to put some data in this collection or find some data from this collection. So collection dot find, like so, would find all of the data in the collection. And we can say students equals collection dot find, and then say print students. And now this is not going to do exactly what we would expect, because it prints out a pymongo.cursor object at a memory address. So this is not really the students that are in our database, but rather this cursor object is something that points to the first element of our database, and then we can use it to move on to the next element or on to the following element and so on. So it starts at the very beginning of our collection, and we can use it to move on to the following elements so as to iterate them or move over them and do stuff with them. So what we have to do really is say for student in students print student. And this will actually print the students out. So here we can see this is the first and the only student in our database that we created in the last video. So possibly against what we had originally intended, we're not going to be creating anything related to students in this section. So instead we're going to be creating, as I said before, a blog that runs on the terminal. That is so that we can get acquainted with creating different posts and creating a blog, and then putting some content in each and doing what's known as object-oriented programming with these things. So we're going to scrape this students collection and instead create a posts collection, and we're going to put some sample data in it in the very next video, and then we're going to see how we can, what sort of things we can do with it. So I'll see you in the next video. Hi and welcome back to the course. So in the last video we real quick just had a look at how we could use PyMongo and interact with MongoDB through Python. In this video we're going to simplify just these two lines ever so slightly in order to introduce another concept that is extremely important in Python and is used everywhere that you see a Python program. And this concept is called list comprehension. And list comprehension is something that Python has that many other languages, or in fact no other language that I can speak fluently or can write fluently, does. So if you know Java or Ruby or PHP or any of those languages, they do not have list comprehension, at least not at this time. And this is something that Python does and is actually so cool the way that Python does it. So we're going to simplify this for one simple reason. When you do a for loop, it is because you want to do something with each of the elements of the list that you're iterating over. So here we would want to, for example, print out each of the students, or get the mark of each of the students and then get an average or something like that. So in this instance, for what we want to do, it makes sense to do a for loop, because we want to go through each of the students and print them out. In other cases, however, what we would want to do is for the students variable to contain a list of the students as opposed to a MongoDB, a PyMongo cursor object. So how would we first assign this to the students variable, and then assign to the students variable the list of students inside that cursor? So what we would have to do is have something like student list is empty, and then for each of the students in students, say student list dot append, and then student. So we could do this, and then what this would do, this append method does, is gets this list up here and then adds something to it. So each of the students in our student collection would be going into the student list, and then we would end up with student list being our list of students. So we could do that, but now we need a few lines and we end up with two variables. One of them is our cursor object and the other one is our list object. So say we didn't want to do that. Say we wanted to say that our students are the students in this collection. So what we could do is say, put this collection.find inside a pair of square brackets, and then we would say the contents of this students list is each of the students for student in students, but this students really is collection.find. So what we're saying here is, for each of the elements in this collection.find, which we are calling student, simply put all of it inside this new list. And what this does is, if we print students, is it puts all the students inside a list, like so. However, we could also say student mark, and then when printing that out, we would get out the 99 only, which is the mark. So what this does is, for each of the students in this collection.find, get the mark and put it inside this list. So get the student mark for each of the students in here. Notice that we can call this student whatever we want. It doesn't have to be a student. This ASDFG is simply the name we're giving to each of the elements as we iterate this collection.find method call. In order to rename the variables here, I'm pressing Shift function 6, Shift F6, and that is called refactoring the variable name, and you can do that, and then you can rename your variables like so. So we're calling a student simply for readability purposes, and what we're doing is we're going over the collections, we're calling each of the elements student, and then we're getting the student mark, and all of those student marks, we're putting them inside a list. And this is called list comprehension. We can also say student mark for student in collection.find if student mark is 100.0. So in this case, our list will end up empty because my mark was 99.0 and not 100.0. If we change it to 99.0, then the list once again has a value. So we can do a lot of things here in this list comprehension, and now we're no longer needing these two variables and this for loop. We can simply do it all here quite succinctly in one line, quite readable, very Pythonic way of doing it, and you will no doubt find this throughout your reading and your studying as you figure out and learn more about Python. and indeed as you use Python yourselves. Okay, so this was just a quick video on list comprehension, and we're going to be moving on into doing object-oriented programming in the very next video. So I'll see you there. Hi and welcome back to the course. In this video we're going to be starting to do object-oriented programming. Now this is quite a scary topic when you're starting, but it's really not that difficult. The only thing you have to remember is object-oriented programming has a really good name. Object-oriented programming really encourages you to think of things as things. So for example, if you look at something that you've got in front of you, such as a laptop or a desktop computer, they have a number of properties, such as their color, or their CPU power, or indeed the keyboard layout, or any number of other things. And they also have a number of things they can do, a number of actions they can achieve or perform, such as turning on or turning off or saving a document, for example. And indeed the same would happen with every other object that is around you. All objects have a certain number of properties and a certain number of actions. And you can simplify those or complicate those as much as you want. For example, this laptop or desktop that you've got in front of you, does it have really a CPU speed property? Or is that a property of another object that is inside your laptop, the processor? So thinking about these things and realizing that objects really are compositions of other objects, and indeed all objects have these properties and these methods they can do, these actions. If you start thinking of things around you in that way, that will simplify the way that you interact with programming as a whole. So realize that everything can be decomposed into a number of properties and a number of actions or methods. And when you do that, you realize that everything you want to make in programming can be an object. For example, if you want to interact with a printer, you would have a printer object. If you want to interact specifically with a Canon printer that has a specific property that no other printer has, then that Canon printer can also be another object. If you have students in your database, you may want to make student objects because all of the students have certain properties that one student to the next may have differing values for those properties. For example, one student may have blonde hair and the other one may have brown hair, but they both have hair, or they may have no hair indeed, but no hair is also a property that hair would encompass, as you may have long hair or short hair or no hair or a shaved head. So all of these properties and indeed all the actions that these students could do could be enclosed in what's called a student object. So these properties, such as the color of their hair, or the length of the hair, or whether they can walk or run or eat, these are all not defined on a per object basis. If you had to do that, then you would have to say, I'm going to create a thing here called Joe, and Joe can eat, and Joe can walk, and Joe can run, and then I'm going to create a different thing entirely here called Anna, and Anna can eat, and Anna can walk, and she can run, and then you would have to do that for every student that you ever have, and so that would be a lot of typing. So obviously we don't want to do that. We don't want to be defining each student as their own thing. So what we want to do instead is say all students have a color of hair, and they all have a mark, they all have a degree that they're doing. And now we can say, and Rolf is a student, so therefore he must have these properties. And we can simply say, so Rolf's hair color is blonde and the degree he's doing is computer science. And Anna, her hair color is brown and the degree she's doing is applied computing, for example. And now all of these students are the same sort of thing, the same type of thing, but they all have their own individual values for the properties, even though we know they all have the same properties. So enough with my rant here or monologue. Let's go and see if we can create an object. So the way we're going to approach this is we're going to say all the things that we use in our application for now are going to be models. And these models are, as you would expect, a thing that models something from the real life. So for example, a post in our blog is something from real life. It could be a piece of paper that has a title and it has some sort of content and it has a date that it was written. So we're going to create a Python package called models, and then we're going to right click that and create a new Python file called post. And now we're going to define this part of the program that specifies that posts as a general type of thing have a content and have an author and have a title. So in order to do that, we use what's called a class. So this type of thing that has a content and an author and a title, this type of thing is a class of thing. So we can classify these things that have these shared properties as the same class, as the same thing. So these are all going to be posts. So we actually don't need that. This class of type post is in fact an object that has a number of properties and a number of things that it can do. So that's why we put the object here between the brackets. We say this post comes from an object. So we can treat it as an object, and we're also going to specify a certain number of properties that it also has, as well as being an object. So we then specify what properties each post will have. And we do that in the init method. The init method stands for initialize and is the method that gets called when you say, I'm going to create a new thing that is a post. And this new thing that is a post is going to have the following content and the following title, for example. So here we say self, which is this thing that you are creating, dot title equals, this is my title. Sorry about that. And then self.content equals, this is some content. Self.author is Jose, which is me. Okay. So now let's go back to our app and remove all this. And instead say we're going to create our first post. So we're going to say post equals post. And we're going to have to import this post from our models.post file. So models.post file that we've got up here is the container of our class that we are importing, which is the post with a capital P. And then we say our variable called post, remember you can call this whatever you want, is an instance of this class. Basically we have post, we can have post2 equals post. So now these two are, just as in the student example, they are different posts. Think of it different pieces of paper with different titles, different contents, different authors. However, when we print post dot content and then we print post2 dot content, sorry about that, we will see if we run this that they both have the exact same content. Now this is nothing to be surprised at, because if we go to our post file, we can see that we've defined here that the content of the object that we are creating is this is some content. So if we go to our app, here we're creating one post and the content for it is this is some content, and we're putting this object that has that content inside our variable, and then we're creating another post that also has this is some content as its content, and we're putting that post inside the variable post2. So although they are different posts, they both have the same content. If we say post2.content equals some different content, and we run this again, we now see that post.content has this is some content, which is the default, the one we defined inside the init method, and post2 has some different content in it, which is what we changed up here. So these two are different things of the same type the same class. And this is the basis for object-oriented programming. So it sounds, I hope, simple enough. And I know it may be a bit confusing in the beginning when you're thinking, this is a computer, man. There are no objects, there are no classes, there are no things. It only knows ones and zeros. So what are you talking about? And of course, the computer doesn't know that these things are objects, and it doesn't know these things are posts. All it knows is there are a bunch of ones and zeros somewhere inside the computer. And through the years of programming, we've come to develop Python as a language in which you can do this. You can create this sort of abstraction that allows us to understand what's going on in a lot easier way. So for us, it makes sense to think of this as things that are in the real world, 2 pieces of paper with some properties in it. That makes sense for us as people. It doesn't make sense for the computer at all, of course. But the key here is to make us understand what is going on so that we can make programs, we can make software quickly and easily, even if that added complexity of having these objects and having to treat them as such in the computer makes the computer go slower. It makes us go faster, and that is the whole point of it. So think of it as things in real life, because that is the point of object-oriented programming. So obviously we could do this. We could create some default content. So whenever you create a new post, then the title is, this is my title, the content is, this is some content, and the author is Jose. You could do this. However, that would be slightly limiting, because then when you create a post and you want to change the content, you have to add another line that changes the content of it. So instead, what we can do is say, after the self, put a comma and say title, content, and author, and pass these 3 as parameters. Like so. So then what we'll do is say self.title, which is the object we're creating. Title is the title that we pass the init method. Self.content is the content we pass the init method. Self.author is the author we pass the init method. And then here we have to say post1 title, post1 content, post1 author. And I'm going to copy this and change it to post2. And then we no longer need that. And now if we print this out, we see that post1 content and post2 content get printed out, because that's what we passed it in the init method. So now the post gets initialized with this title, this content, and this author. And this other post gets initialized with this title, this content, this author. So that simplifies the creation process slightly. Now we can create a new object of type post already initialized with some certain properties that we know beforehand. So for example, when our user of our app comes to write a new post, we will ask them for a title and we will ask them for some content, and then we'll create a new object with that title and that content. So this is what object-oriented programming is, and I understand this video was a bit dense. There's a lot of me talking and not much doing, but hopefully helped you understand, and it will help you throughout the next sections to understand really what's going on. And remember, if you want to research this a bit more, I encourage you to do that and to try to understand and think of the things around you as objects that have properties and that have some actions they can do. So until the next video, where we're going to be implementing this post a bit more in detail and see at the things it contains and the things it can do. So yeah, hopefully that was alright for you guys, and I'll see you in the next video. Hi and welcome back to the course. In this video, we're just going to be taking a look at how we can create our post class. So if we go to our post.py file here, and I'm just going to add a new line there, we'll see that we have now created an init method. So when we create a new post object, when we tell Python, I want one of these new things that you can call posts and that have title, content, and author, when we do that, we can specify the title, the content, and the author of the post upon creation. And that simplifies later on, so we don't have to change the properties after creating the object. So that's all good. what other things will this post need? Posts are going to need a blog ID, and what this is which blog does this post live in? Basically, if this post is under my blog or Joe's blog. So we need a way to identify the blog that this post belongs to. So we're going to have a blog ID variable. And this blog ID, as I said, is just which blog am I in? Am I in my blog, Joe's blog, or Rolf's blog, or Anne's blog? We're going to need title, we're going to need content, we're going to need author, and we possibly will also need a post ID. What is the ID of this specific post? So this ID is used to identify the post. We could use the title as an identifier, but then we would never be able to have two posts with the same title. So that may not be a big problem, but just in case, let's stick to having an ID for each post. And this ID is always going to be unique. Now, posts can do things. What sort of things can a post do? Well, it can save itself to the database, for example. And you may be thinking, well, a post can't really save itself to a database, can it? Something else can save the post to the database, but really, that may be a bit of a line that you can be on one side or the other. So you can have something else saving a post to the database, or you can say the post knows what the database is and can therefore save itself to the database. And I think that makes sense. That's kind of like saying, can a student go to class or do they have to be taken? Well, it depends on the motivations of the student, I guess. So in this case, let's say the post can save itself to the database because it knows where the database is, and therefore it can simply put its own data into the database. So what is the data that this post contains, or what makes up this post? So in order to decide what makes up this post, I'm going to create another method called JSON. And this JSON method, what it does is it creates a JSON representation of the post itself. So this JSON representation is really just a key value set. So it can have ID. So the ID of the post is self.id. This object's ID. So if we're talking about post 1, then this would be 1. If we're talking about post 2, then this would be 2. It also has a blog ID, which is self blog ID. It also has an author, which is self.author. It also has a content, which is self.content. It also has a title, which is self.title. And it also probably has a date in which it was created. So I'm going to put that up here as well in the init method, self.created date equals date. And notice that I can do this. I can say self.created date equals date. They don't have to have the same name, even though they tend to. They don't necessarily have to have the same date. And I'm using created date because I think that reads a bit nicer. And because up here, it really doesn't matter what you call it. You could call it created date up here as well if you wanted. There you go. So this JSON method now returns a JSON representation of the object. Basically, the ID, and then the ID, blog ID, blog ID, and all of the data then related to this blog post. And then the save to Mongo method, or action, the only thing it has to do is it has to say, get this data here and put it in the database. So what we'll do is say database.insert, and we're going to work on what this is in a moment. Posts self.json. We're going to be creating the database class in the very next video. So do not worry if you think this is a bit of magic, because I appreciate that it may look a bit like it, but really it will work. So what this will do is it'll connect to the database somehow, and it will insert some data in this collection. Collection equals posts, data equals self.json. So what it'll do is it'll put inside this collection this data. And that's what we're going to be working on in the very next video. So that is what we're going to be looking at in this video. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video where we're going to be working on the database class. So I'll see you there. Hi and welcome back to the course. So in the last video we had a look at some magic here where we would be able to insert things into the database simply by calling database.insert. And obviously Python already tells us that it does not know what database is. It says unresolved reference database. So we have to create this database. Notice that Python doesn't say that this is invalid. It's simply not been created yet. So what we'll do is we're going to go not into our models, but outside of our models and create a new Python file called database. And in here, we're going to create a class database that is also coming from object. Now, let me take a wee second to explain what this is. Basically, what we're doing here is we're saying this class database that I'm creating, remember that class is a definition of a type of thing in the real world. So this class database essentially is an object, and I'm defining some extra properties and extra actions that a database can do on top of what an object could do. So objects in Python, the real kind of object, this thing here, essentially what everything in Python can do. All of the things in Python are objects, and objects can't do very much. There are a number of things that they can do, and they have a few actions. And what will happen here is that because our database is an object with some extra properties and extra functions that it can do, it will also be able to do everything that the object can do. So when we define more methods, we will have all the object methods as well as the database methods we define. So this is called inheritance. And what we're doing here is we're getting our database class to inherit from this object. And that way, our database will contain all of those methods that the object has in Python. So that's just a quick overview as to what that is. So yeah. Anyway, our database class, which is the focus of this video. The database has a number of things that it needs in order to connect to a database. The first thing it needs is a URI, a Universal Resource Identifier. And this URI is going to be the MongoDB address. So as you know, this is MongoDB ://127.0.0.1 27017. Sorry about that. 27017, which is the port number. And we're also going to need a database. And now let me explain exactly what this is. Normally, we would be defining variables in the init method. And we would have self-URI equals something and self.database equals none. And what this would do, it would say database. I'm going to create a new object of type database, and this database object is going to have its own specific URI and its own specific database. So if we create two database objects, they could have different URIs and different databases. And I think that makes sense up to now, and if it doesn't, then you may want to watch a couple of videos before. But anyway, so these two database objects have these two different URIs and these two different databases. But really that's not what we want in this case. We don't want to have two different URIs. We want all of our connections to go to this URI. And we don't want two different databases. We in fact will always be using the same database for this project, which is the full stack database. We will also be using always the same collection or possibly two collections, which is the posts and the blogs collections. So we don't want self.database anywhere, because what that would do is it would say we need to create a database object, and this object will have its own URI and its own database. So instead what we want to say is database is a more overarching thing. It is not a real world object, but rather it is a blueprint. What I mean with this is this URI would be the same for every database that we create if we wanted to create many. And this database would also be the same for every database we create if we wanted to create many. So I'm going to put a link under the video that will explain this in more depth, and that will help you understand, so that we don't, essentially I don't bore you talking about these sort of things. But just imagine that we had multiple objects of type database. The URI would be the same for all of them. That is what this static property is. It is a property that is shared among all objects of a class. So instead of them each having their own URI, they would all have the same URI. And that's what we would want, because we always want to be connecting to the same MongoDB instance. We always want to be connecting to the local instance. So we have no use for any object-only properties, or also called instance properties. We don't want to be creating objects that have their own anything. All objects are only going to use this URI and this database. So really we don't need an init method at all, because we're not initializing any objects. We're not going to be initializing objects at all. Instead, what I'm going to create is an initialize method. And this is not a Python only thing. And I'm going to remove the self keyword from the beginning. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say client, which is my variable, is pymongo.mongoclient. And I'm going to have to import pymongo. And now in this bracket, I want to put this URI here. But notice how it doesn't let me, because it says it is an unresolved reference. And that is because the only way to access this URI is through the database class. So if we say database.uri, now it knows that this URI lives in the database. So we can access things via self, and that is the object's value. So different URIs for each object would be accessed via self.uri. If we have a class URI, which is called the static property or static variable, then we need to access it through the database class. So at no point can we simply do URI unless the URI is defined inside the method. So database.uri, and that works. And something else we have to do is we have to tell Python that we're not going to be using self. And the way to do that is say at static method before the method itself. So what this does is it says, hey Python, we're not going to be using self in this method because this method is going to belong only to the database class as a whole and never to an instance of a database. And then we'll say database.database, which is this variable here, equals client full stack. And this is our full stack database that we created in MongoDB. And what that does is now database.database contains the database for this project. And we can access it from other parts of the program simply by saying database.database. So let's have a look at creating the insert method that we were looking at before. This insert method takes in a collection where are we going to write the data, and some data, which is what we're going to write. So once again, this insert method, the only thing it's going to do is it's going to say database.database and then collection.insert data. and the parameters it takes is collection and data. So what we're going to do here is we're going to give this insert method a collection, and what we're going to get is that collection first of all, and then we're going to insert data into that collection, and the data that we're going to insert is the thing that we pass the method. And once again, we need to make this method static as well. And now what we can do is copy this and paste it a couple of times and change it to find and find one. Find and find one. So what this does is it is going to find data. This is going to return a pymongo.cursor.cursor object, as we looked at in the first video where we looked at pymongo. And this find one method is not going to return a cursor actually, because if you remember, the cursor was used to start at the beginning of the collection and then go through each of the elements one by one. The find one method, what it does is it gets the first element that gets returned by the cursor and then gives that to us. So it doesn't return a cursor, it actually returns the JSON object that is stored in the database directly. So when we're finding one, we're not really finding data. What we're doing is we're performing a query. So I'm going to press Shift F6 and rename these things to query. And notice how these variables get renamed as well. And this is our database class now ready to be used. So if we go to our post and we import this, notice that it likes that and it thinks that is an acceptable thing to do. So now the collection variable, which is this one, and the data parameter, which is this one, now get passed into the insert method, which puts the data in the database. Just quickly going over what is happening again. We're defining a URI and a database as being class or static variables. This means that all database objects are indeed, the whole database class has these two variables stored in it. Any database objects that we create will also have these two values. Because we're never creating any database objects, we don't need to, because we've got the values that we need here. We can simply skip the init method entirely and not use self at all, and simply use static methods. The static methods can use these values by simply saying database.uri, and that gets this value. Database.database gets this value. Notice that we can also say database.uri from other classes as well if we wanted to. And then what we're doing in an initialize method is saying get me a client with database.uri, which is this one, and then get me the database that we're going to be using, which is the full stack database. Now that we're initialized, remember we will have to call this at the beginning of our program. When we're initialized, database.database will contain the database that we're using, the full stack database. So then we can say database, get me the collection and put some data in it. And the collection will be, in this case, posts, and the data will be self.json. In our app.py at the very beginning, we'll have to say database.initialize. We will have to import this. Now we will have to do this so that the database calls pymongo.mongo client and then gets the URI and initializes the database itself. So things are getting a bit more complicated now, but hopefully you're hanging in there. This object-oriented programming gets a bit difficult when we introduce these static properties here as well. If you're having a lot of difficulty and you have absolutely no idea what's going on, then go ahead and do ask questions, of course, but may I also recommend learning a bit more of the basics of computer science, possibly with the Computer Science for Absolute Beginners course that uses Java, but also introduces the same concepts. One thing to remember before we continue, however, is to make sure that these methods are not only performing the search, but also returning a value from it. If not, they will be performing the search and then returning none, which is the default, and we will never be able to find any data from these two methods. This method does not have to return anything because it simply puts something into the database and does not expect anything back. If you are confident that you know what's going on, or at least you kind of get it, then please do move on. Ask all the questions you need. That's why we've got the private group in Slack for it, and I'll be glad to help you out with it. And let's move on into the next video, where we're going to be continuing our post object class, and then after that creating our blog. So I'll see you in the next one. Hi and welcome back to the course. In this video we're going to be looking at a couple more methods from the post class. It's going to be a really quick video. The first method I want to create is to create a from Mongo method. And what this method will do is it will allow us to say post dot from Mongo, give it an ID, and it will give us back the Mongo data that we get from the database. So this is also going to be a static method, as we looked at in the last video. And what this does is it says data is database.find1 from posts. And I'm going to say collection equals posts. And remember, this collection equals is completely optional. You don't have to write it in there if you don't want. I like to write it in there, and I will start doing so from now, essentially, just to help us continue to get acquainted with Python and do things not the right way, because there is no single right way, but slightly better, slightly more readable, just good practices overall. So the collection is posts, and what we are finding is a post that has the ID, and this is called the query. And what this will do is it'll find one post that has this ID that we pass the method as a parameter. So now we'll be able to do something like post dot from Mongo 1, 2, 3. And what that'll do is it'll give us the post that has ID 1, 2, 3. And then instead of data equals, we're going to say return. And we're going to return this data here. Similarly, we can also return all of the posts belonging to a specific blog. From blog ID, and then we'll return database.find posts query equals blog ID, ID is ID, and this would be collection equals. So the ID that we give it, we will use there, and then the collection we're looking for is in posts. This will find all of the posts that live in a specific blog ID. But do notice that this is not going to return a list of posts, it is going to return a PyMongo cursor. So what I want to do is say post for post in here. And now this will return a list of the posts. Okay, so these are two quick methods that will let us get a post from MongoDB and also get all the posts belonging to a specific blog. In the next couple of videos, we're going to be creating the blog class, and finally we're going to be able to put data into our blog. So I'll see you in the very next video. So in this video, we're going to be looking at default values for parameters, and also we're going to look at a shorthand if statement. So for example, let's say that when we create a blog post from the database, so when we're finding something on the database, retrieving it, and then creating an object with the data that comes from the database, that database already has an ID, for example, for the blog post, and that's how we find it, for example. So if we already have an ID for the post, then what we want to do is get the ID and put it inside the self.id variable. That makes sense. But what if we don't already have an ID, because we've just created a new post and we want the ID to be self-generating, so we don't have to worry about giving it an ID? And also, what happens if we want the ID to be a really long string with numbers and characters so that the IDs are always unique? Well, we've got to find a way in order so that we can say, if we've already got an ID, use that ID, and if we don't already have an ID, then generate a new one. So the module we're going to be using to generate these unique IDs is called UUID. And we're going to have to import it. And then say UUID.UUID4 open and close bracket .hex. Now let me explain real quick what this is. So UUID is the module when we're importing it up here as well. And that stands for Universally Unique Identifier. And then we're getting UUID4 is the method we're using to generate the UUID. And UUID has a number of ways to generate these. Number 4 is a random UUID. So other UUIDs would take in a value and then generate the identifier from that value by doing a number of things with the value. But in our case, we want to generate it randomly. And then .hex simply gives us a 32-bit hexadecimal string. Sorry, a 32-character hexadecimal string. So once we've got that, it means that we are always going to be generating a new identifier for a post whenever we create a post. This means that the ID that we pass in the init method is no longer used, but we don't want that. We want to make sure that if we've already got an ID for the post in a database, that we use that ID. So the way to do that is to say, we're going to use this hex value if the ID is none. So use this if the ID is none. I think that's quite readable. And if not, else use ID that we pass here. So UID, UID4 hex if ID is none, and if not, use ID. These two are the values that we are putting into self.id depending on the condition. This one and this one here. And we will also need a default value for our ID parameter. And what I mean with this is, if we don't give the init method an ID parameter, we want ID to be none. And if we do give it a value, then we want it to be that value. And the way we do that in Python equals none. And now we may choose to not give this parameter a value. And if we don't give it a value, it will default to none. And we could do the same with other values as well. However, we must remember that we cannot do this. We cannot have a parameter with a default value and then parameters without default values and then a parameter with a default value then, or in fact, just that is not allowed. So a non-default parameter follows default parameter is an error. We can only have default parameters at the end. So that would be valid. And now what this will do is if we pass ID a value, we would use that value. And if we don't, we would use UID UID4.hex. Okay. So think about whether you'd want to use default value for something else. For example, the date. You could use today's date as a default value. And that would also be fairly simple to do. We would need to use a datetime module that we're going to be looking at in the very next video. So I'll see you there. Hi and welcome back. Let's take a quick look at how we can set a default value for the date to be today's date. So what we want to do is, of course, say date equals today. And in order to do that, we are going to need to use the datetime module. And this datetime module, what it says is, it says call the module and then call the datetime class and say UTC now. And basically a datetime is an object, just like the post object, that contains some properties which are the year, month, day, hour, minute and second, and as well as the time zone and a couple other things as well. So this UTC now method, what it does is it creates a datetime object that has the time and date right now. And then we assign that to the date, and that will be the default date for a post that we create. So if we decide not to pass the constructor or the init method a date, then we can simply use today's date. So what I mean with that is, as an example here, we would say post equals post, and then blog ID equals 123, title equals a title, content equals some content, author equals Jose, and then we could leave it as that. We've got blog ID, title, content, and author. Blog ID, title, content, and author. The date would be today's date, and the ID would be none. If we want to assign an ID, we could do that, although it's not recommended because they are generated automatically. If we want to assign a date, we could do that. Datetime UTC now would be today, and we can do more things to subtract days from a date and make it yesterday, for example. So this is how we would use that default value. And what we're going to be doing is now moving on to the blog and seeing how we can indeed create these posts and put them in blogs and then display the blogs themselves. So I'll see you in the next video. Hi and welcome back. So in this video we're going to have a look at whether the methods we've just written for the post actually work and we can put things into the database and get things out. So the first thing to do is to create a new post. And this post is going to contain all these variables here. Notice how PyCharm already tells us which ones have default values, which ones don't, and what their names are. So blog ID is going to be 123. This is a sample value, and I've already got another post in the database with the same blog ID, so therefore we can do something searching for blog IDs as well. Title is going to be another great post. Content is going to be, this is some sample content, and author is going to be Jose. We're going to leave the other two as blank, and they will default to today's date and none respectively. And then we'll say post save to Mongo. I'm going over to the terminal real quick, and I'm going to find whatever is in the database right now, and you can see that I've already got one post here. So I'm going to run this again and then go back to the terminal and find again, and now notice that we've got two different posts. One of them is another great post that we've just put in, and notice how the date defaults to 20th of September, which is today. The time is 11:36, and this is an interesting problem here slash thing. The time right now is actually 12:36. However, because we said UTC now as being a default and not just now, this is not time zone aware, meaning that's what the Z means at the end. This is doesn't have any time zone data. It is simply at +0 UTC time zone essentially. And you should use this time zone when you're putting things into the database, because then it is very easy for you to convert from a time zone naive object like this one into a different time zone. For example, if you wanted to convert it to British time, you simply have to add 1 hour to it. However, if you store it in British time and you wanted to convert it to American time, you'd have to know how many hours you've got to subtract from British time to make it American time. And normally, the way you would do it is store it as +0 and then simply subtract 7 hours or whatever it is, the number of hours that you need to subtract. And that way it makes it a bit simpler, it makes it a bit more consistent. And if you always use UTC time as opposed to your local time when storing things in a database, that means it is much more easily localizable. So that is simply something I would recommend. But now notice that we've got two posts, so I'm going to go back into PyCharm, and then we can say something like post equals post from Mongo, and then find one with a specific ID, which I'm going to just get the one we just wrote, and then put it in there, and then say print post. And then we press play again. Notice that we found the content from the database with that ID, and that then we are able to print it out. Brilliant. We could also do, instead of from Mongo, we can do from blog. and then pass it in the blog ID that we just gave it. And notice that both posts have the same blog ID. So now we would call these posts, and we would say for post in posts, print post. And then we would print them all. Do remember that the from blog method is not a find one call, it is instead a find call, so it would return a cursor. And then we press play, and notice how we get both blog posts printed out here into our console. So this is how we would do that. And now we are finally able to move on